Hey everybody, this is Joseph here at LifeSource. So today, I know it's been kind of a busy little period here. I've had a couple of funerals to, unfortunately, to share in and work in this past month. A very good friend of mine, Wilma Rogers Moten, died this past month, and I shared in her homegoing. And another good friend of mine, Bill Sims, died as well. Wilma, I knew the first most interesting thing about her was that she was one of the early members of the Black Panthers here in Oakland when she came here as probably just in her very early 20s. And the Black Panthers actually motivated her to go to school, which was an interesting thing. But we were friends roughly 25, 30 years. I can't even believe I've been in California that long, but been here that long. Bill Sims and I, we met over the death of his son. I was the reporting officer regarding the murder of his son by some gentleman pretty much the Sunday following Election Day 2016. It was an unfortunate time, but Bill struck me in that he was able to carry on. He took the news hard, but he was able to help his family recover and move on. And that was just a great thing to see, the way he handled it. He was just a great friend. I miss them both, and I look forward to seeing them in the kingdom. But here's what I want to talk about today as we're going into Sunday, and that is critical race theory. And so I want to talk about the father of what we call American slavery. Most people think that it was the Europeans and the English and those guys who kind of brought this horrific version of slavery to America, and it was not. The Spaniards and the Portuguese who brought slaves into the West back in the 1400s, couple of hundred years before the English formally showed up with slaves. They had a view of slavery in that once you were a slave for life. And that was also the perspective held by Arab slavers and African slavers who pretty much ran the slave trade out of Africa into essentially Southern Europe. And they had held that practice for a few hundred years. So that said, what was the root of permanent slavery? That is the enslavement of not just the person, but their children and family members in perpetuity. Well, that comes to us from a gentleman by the name of Anthony Johnson. And Anthony was not an Englishman. Anthony was not a European. Anthony was an Angolan. He was from Angola, the African slavers there, but he himself was a slave. And in coming to America as a slave in 1621, he entered under the English structure of slavery, which was essentially what we call indentured servitude. So he came to America, served his 7 years, was able to get out of indentured servitude with his wife. Anthony became a very, 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 very successful businessman. So he was, introduced to slavery under the Portuguese, but he was brought to America where he came to this system of slavery. And what was the early English colonist system of slavery? Well, the early English colonist system of slavery was, again, indentured servitude. You served 7 years, and at that point, you pretty much earned your freedom or were able to go your merry way. That's what happened to both Anthony Johnson, or some people call him Antonius Johnson, and his wife. So, Anthony Johnson got his freedom, and he became a very, very, very successful business owner fairly quickly. Worked really hard, got to be a landowner, got a host of indentured servants, largely white, and some black indentured servants. But at some point, Anthony decided, now this was not in America, there had been some of the colonies, Maryland and some others in the 1630s and 40s, which had begun, you might say, experimenting with permanent slavery. But it was kind of a new thing, and no one really kind of knew how it works. So Anthony did the world a favor Anthony had a slave run away who actually hired himself on some years after his indentured servitude was supposed to end. He hired himself on with a white man, basically, that he had agreed to work to for 7 years and be an indentured servant, and then the white man would also release him. Well, Anthony Johnson, whose slave, I believe his name was Cassis, John Cassis, was working for initially. Anthony Johnson didn't like that. He contended that John Cassis was his slave for life. So here, Mr. Black, Anthony Johnson, went to court. This is the first court case regarding formal slavery in what would become America. It was in Virginia. Anthony Johnson went to court, argued that the black man, John Cassis, was his lifelong slave. Now, you should know some things about Mr. Johnson. He owned, quite a few hundred acres of land, and even his sons had worked with him, and they owned quite a few hundred acres of land. Anthony Johnson was so well known and so well liked that he was known as a friend of the English crown. Yes, that black man, Anthony Johnson, was a friend of the English crown. In fact, the English crown gave him land. A parcel of land, so that he could continue expanding. He was such a good businessman that they gave him land and honored him as a colony's job creator. So Anthony Johnson was known as a true entrepreneur in that he created jobs. Now, of course, it was for indentured servants, but he continued to also acquire slaves. So Mr. Johnson goes to court against the white man who had taken the man who he claimed was his lifelong servant, John Cassis. He took that man to court. So what was the end? The end was that because Mr. Johnson, Anthony Johnson, was a wealthy, powerful man in the colony of Virginia. Didn't matter that he was black, but he was a wealthy, powerful man in the colony of Virginia and a friend of the English crown. There really wasn't a very long trial or discussion. Most of the colonies had kind of begun to, as I said, experiment with lifelong slavery. And so Anthony Johnson made this contention in court, being a friend of the crown. The court really didn't spend a lot of time on the subject. So they said basically that John Cassis was Anthony Johnson's lifelong slave, and all of his descendants would be Anthony Johnson's lifelong slaves. That is how slavery came to life in America as we know it. It wasn't the English coming over and arguing that. It wasn't white people or Europeans. It was a black man who contended that another black man and his descendants should be his slaves for life. That's the problem. One more problem with critical race theory. So just so you know, you want to know where black-on-black crime began in America? Look for the name Anthony Johnson, the first man who was affirmed by a state or a colony government to actually be able to own a slave for life. Want you to know, we'll probably just do some of these things as we're going along because it's important that people know the truth. And I want you to do again, look up the name. There are pictures of him. In fact, I'll add a couple of pictures here in this share here on this video. But yeah, Anthony Johnson, the name of the man who brought slavery to America as we now recognize it for 200 plus years. Yeah. Think about it carefully, folks, and look at the decisions you are making and the choices you are making in your life with the people you share with, because they can have consequences that carry on long after you leave this life. And remember this, God loves you and he loves everyone else too. So let's try to love each other like God loves us. This is Joseph from LifeSource. I'm out.